I grew up in an old farmhouse in New Hampshire, USA. Attached to it was a carriage house that had a second-floor attic where I had some of the strangest things of my life happen to me. It was full of junk left by the previous few owners. It always gave me the creeps being up there. The house was shaped sort of like the letter L, and the room I shared with my brothers had a window that you could see into from the second floor of the carriage house. When I was little, like between 4 and 10, sometimes I would see faint faces in the carriage house attic windows, both during the day and at night. But the two moments that stand out happened when I was older. In 8th grade, I got home from school around 3 p.m. and was the only one home. Around this time in my life, I would occasionally go in the attic and dig through some of the junk up there and find stuff I found neat. But only during the day, or maybe if a friend was with me. Anyway, I go up there solo and start digging around. The stairs to get up there are very creaky and loud when you go up them. So when I start to hear someone slowly walking up them, I instantly start to get nervous. I'm hoping it's my brother getting home from high school. He would get baked up there before my parents would get home from work. So I call out his name, and the steps stop for about 20 seconds, and then start again. At this point, if there was someone coming up the steps, I would have been able to see them, but no one's there. Then the steps start creaking towards me at the far end of the attic, and they get about halfway before I summon the strength to open and drop through the trap door near me. Scared the shit out of me. I told my dad about it that night, and he told me he's had similar things happen up there, especially when him and my mom first bought and moved into the house. It took me years to even go up there again, which brings me to the other spooky event I want to share. In my early 20s, I was living in Boston, and I told a friend of mine about some of the spooky stuff that happened to me in that attic. My friend was super into paranormal things, so we wanted to go up there sometime and check it out. So we drive up one weekend and decide we'll go up to the attic in the middle of the night. I'm pretty cool with it, because I was much older and hadn't lived in the house for years. Oh, and beer. So we go up a little buzzed and armed with a flashlight each. We start going through some stuff together and come across a random book. This is the freaky part. We had both of our lights trained on the book, and we see that there's a name written on the first page. Then at the exact same time, both of our flashlights slowly fade out. Silence is deafening, and then what do you know? Footsteps start walking across the floor towards us. I wasted no time this go-around, and I drag him to the trap door, and we hop down to the first floor and get out of there. I see him every once in a while, and we laugh about it now, but we were definitely both freaked out that night. I lived in a Victorian house in Massachusetts, in the Berkshires, that was over 100 years old. One night, while trying to get to sleep, my bedroom door opened on its own. I got up to close it, and upon returning to bed, I found it had opened itself again, despite being fully closed. I closed it again, walked slowly backward to my bed, and watched as the doorknob turned and the door opened inward again. I got up, checked the hallway to make sure a parent wasn't playing an unusual trick on me, closed the door, put a small plastic chair in front of it, and sat waiting on my bed, staring at the door and chair. About 20 seconds later, the chair fell to the side, the doorknob turned, and the door opened. I left the door open for the rest of the night as I slept. Down that same hallway, at a different time, my mother experienced having her bedroom door slam inches from her face as she returned to bed one night. Once we sold the place, the new owners contacted us later and complained that we had not disclosed that the house was haunted. We were amused, but they were not. She explained that she witnessed a man dressed in military uniform walk down that same hallway and down the back stairs while she was completely alone in the house. She called the police, sure that there was an intruder, but no sign of anyone was found. The attic of that home was filled with old dusty portraits of the founders of that town, and the elementary school I went to had been named after their family. The grandfather clock that came with the house would chime off hour, an extra time, every day at 1:16 p.m., which was apparently the time that the last owner of the house had passed away. That house was haunted, and I don't even typically believe that shit. My folks bought their house just outside of Kennebunkport, Maine, when I was a sophomore in college. From the road, it's a quaint, classic New England cape, but as with most of these homesteads, its square footage is all in the rear. There's an old New England saying, big house, little house, back house, barn, to describe the floor plan orientation of farmhouses in the frigid northeast corner. My parents' house follows it pretty closely. A formal front house that grew an addition not long after construction, that grew yet another addition within a few years to house a small cottage industry business venture, and then the barn. All in quick succession, so there's less need to stomp out into the blistering January wind. Work, livestock, and home under one interconnected roof. Rabbit's Warren meets colonial sophistication. When they bought the sprawling place, the listed date of construction was 1820. It's a bit complicated, because the whole structure had been moved about 10 miles north in the 1980s to make way for a shopping center. But we could tell from the architectural details that it was clearly built earlier than 1820. After some energetic title and deed record digging, and a few visits to the archives, my mom and I were able to hone in on a construction date, at least of the main front house, of about 1762. It had originally belonged to John and Sally Eaton. Though we don't know much about either, we know that they were middle-class farmers and built the main house when they married. It was handsomely situated on a gently sloping parcel of land within view of the beaches of Wells, Maine, a gift from Sally's father. In time, the house and the Eaton family grew, until by 1980 it was a rundown gift shop trying rather weakly to cater to summer tourist trade. It was purchased and moved to prevent the local fire department from burning it down for practice. All old houses are time capsules, mausoleums, lockboxes. They hold secrets, often for decades or centuries, or forever. They witness so much and absorb it all. Joy, devastation, desperation, need, lust, bewilderment. I've always wondered if maybe what ghosts really are is merely those intense moments still echoing around a creaky old building. Its sponge-like walls absorbing all our passing moments, and sometimes something long stored leaks out. That's the interesting thing about antiques. Everyone who owns them leaves them changed, leaves a mark of some sort. The wear patterns on the butternut pine floor, left from opening and closing a long-gone door to a long-gone pantry. A massive new addition off the main house when money was good. A scorch mark on a beam when a candle was forgotten in a moment of crisis. A sailing ship scratched into the window pane by a bored schoolboy. A stain on the plaster wall from a clumsily spilled glass of wine. Every house, old or new, is a diary of every person who has lived within its walls, if you look closely enough. Or in this case, Listen. It was early January 2004, and cold as hell. Scary cold. Mean, aching cold. I only remember that because it was my first time in Maine in winter since I was a toddler. And goddamn, January in Maine is wicked. The house, having been moved and generally renovated in the 80s, was not the wind tunnel that some old houses can be, but the original 250-year-old windows were no match for the scouring early morning wind. My sister and I were sharing a queen-size bed in the front left room of the main building. It would have originally been a fairly formal space for receiving guests and holding business meetings. My parents had decided it should be a bedroom, a design decision that always irked me. I think that's what initially woke me, a blast of scraping frigid air dragging my cheek. I snapped awake, already a bit on edge because, to be honest, the place creeped me out from the word go. And that was the reason I was sharing the queen bed with my little sister Erin. Ostensibly, we were doing it because the whole house was damn cold and sharing a bed is a wise choice. But actually, we were both terrified of the place. I now began to regret my decision to share the bed with Erin, however. Her back was to me, curled on her side and facing the front wall of the house. She was making the most horrifying series of sounds. Long, ragged, rattling gasps. And my first thought was, oh crap, I'm gonna catch whatever the hell she has. Years later, I would click a link on Reddit I wish I could unhear. The recording of what is colloquially known as a death rattle. And all the hairs on my arms shot up because I knew that sound. I had heard it before. It was what I had heard that morning. A person's last dying breaths. I think I lay staring up at the sturdy wood beams and pleasingly aged plaster of the ceiling for about a minute, listening to the rasping of my sister before I started to worry she was so ill that perhaps medical care was immediately required. With growing alarm, I turned back towards her, but she was no longer facing away. She was staring at me. We locked eyes, and both blanched as we realized the sound was not coming from either of us. Another minute passed as we listened, wide-eyed and horrified as the raking, gurgling breathing continued directly between us, almost as if emanating from the bed itself. It was not faint, and it was not subtle. Finally, and still thinking there was some explanation, we vaulted off the bed on opposite sides and checked under it. Nothing. My parents were by then both at work for the day. My younger brother Chris was across the property, sound asleep on the second floor of the furthest wing, and Moss, the family dog, was also in the back wing. The noise only stopped when Erin and I each started talking at once. And then silence. Old houses have stories to tell. And in checking the history of our home through census, my mother and I learned about a week later that our place had at least one very sad story. John, the original owner, had had a son, also named John. He and his wife had 9 children between about 1800 and 1819. From 1820 to 1830, John Jr., his wife, and 8 of the 9 children would die. The eldest son was lost in a shipwreck, and John himself died of what was likely an ulcer. But the wife and these 7 other children then died one by one in the house in those 10 years, all of consumption. Tuberculosis, a terribly infectious disease in which the lungs break down until the suffering person suffocates under the weight of their own disintegrating tissue. The room we were sleeping in at the time was the largest, and being south-facing, would have been the warmest. Oftentimes, persons in dire health straits would be kept in such rooms in the hope that the warmth might cure them, though with tuberculosis it made no difference. I suspect what my sister and I heard that day was one of the Eatons in their last moments, our bed being right over the spot where they had gasped their last breath. That room is now my parents' master bedroom, but in the 15 years since, no one else has even heard anything. both of our children, when they were younger, regularly saw a man in our house. He was usually standing on the stairs. My daughter, when she was 4 years old, was standing in our foyer and pointed to the stairs and asked, "Who is that man?" I looked up and saw nothing and said that I don't see anything, so she dropped it. I guess I was too busy to think about it again, because I forgot about that man. She didn't bring it up again, and apparently never spoke to her brother about it either. We live in an old New England Victorian, built around 1850. That's a lot of years, but in all those years, only 4 families have lived there. Fast forward 12 years. We are in our dining room having dinner. The subject of ghosts/beings came up because my son had just watched The Sixth Sense. I asked what everyone thought about or what their beliefs were. My daughter reminded me of the incident in the foyer. I told her that I didn't remember that. She said, "Remember, we were in the foyer and I saw a man standing on the stairs, pointed to him and asked who he was. You looked up and said you didn't see anything, so I just let it go." I told her that I had completely forgotten about that. I secretly didn't believe her and said something like, "You're kidding, right?" Except she wasn't. My son, sitting across the table from me, dropped his fork and looked visibly shaken. He said, "You saw him too?" My jaw dropped. My wife stammered, asking if they were really trying to scare us. I asked them if they knew if the other knew about it. They said they never talked about it because who would believe them? Plus, they both said he appeared to be nice and non-threatening, so it didn't really matter. They said the older they had gotten, the less they saw him. Now they only feel his presence, nothing more. That was 5 years ago. Now, when I walk up those stairs, I often feel his presence. The hairs on the back of my head definitely stand on end. And when I'm heading up to bed, I say, "Good night. See you in the morning."